What if the greatest betrayal in history was actually obedience? What if the disciple remembered as the traitor was the only one who truly understood? Tonight we enter one of the most controversial texts ever discovered, the Gospel of Judas. Not a story of treachery, but a story of revelation. The Gospel of Judas is an ancient Christian text discovered in the 20th century, preserved in Coptic and associated with early Gnostic Christianity. Unlike the canonical Gospels, this text presents a radically different perspective. Here, Judas Iscariot is not condemned. He is chosen, not as a villain, but as the one disciple capable of grasping a hidden truth. And the story begins not in a crowd, but in secret conversation. The text opens with a startling image. Jesus appears among his disciples, but instead of teaching in parables to the crowds, he laughs. The disciples are confused, offended. They ask him, "Why are you laughing at us?" And Jesus responds, "I am not laughing at you. You do not know what you are doing." Already, tension fills the air. The other disciples believe they are righteous, faithful, devoted, but Jesus sees something deeper. He sees ignorance, spiritual blindness, and then something remarkable happens. Judas steps forward, not boldly, not arrogantly, but knowingly. He says, "I know who you are and where you have come from." Silence falls. The others do not understand what Judas does. He recognizes that Jesus is not merely a teacher, not merely a prophet, but one who has descended from a higher divine realm. And in that moment, Jesus turns his attention away from the 12 and toward Judas alone. Here the Gospel of Judas introduces one of its central themes. Not all disciples see clearly. Not all who follow understand. In this telling, spiritual knowledge, gnosis, is what separates the awakened from the unaware. And Judas, astonishingly, is portrayed as the awakened one. Jesus says to Judas, "Step away from the others, and I shall tell you the mysteries of the kingdom." The others are left behind. They are portrayed as worshiping incorrectly, praying to a lesser understanding of God. In this Gospel's theology, there exists a distinction between the ultimate invisible spirit and lower cosmic rulers who govern the material world. This is classic Gnostic cosmology, and Judas is invited into its depths. Jesus tells him, "You will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me." Pause there. The line is heavy. You will sacrifice the man that clothes me. In this worldview, Jesus is a divine being, temporarily inhabiting a physical body. The flesh is a garment, a vessel, and Judas's role? To release him from it, not betrayal, but liberation. This completely overturns traditional interpretation. In the canonical Gospels, especially in the Gospel of Matthew and Gospel of John, Judas is condemned as the betrayer. Here he becomes the instrument of divine fulfillment, a chosen participant in a cosmic plan. And yet, this calling comes with a cost. Jesus warns him, "You will be cursed by the other generations." Judas's name will not be honored. He will be misunderstood. He will bear infamy, but he will fulfill the hidden will. The narrative shifts. The other disciples describe a vision. They see themselves in a great temple, offering sacrifices. Serving at an altar, Jesus listens, and again he laughs. He explains that their vision reveals misunderstanding. They believe they serve God, but they are serving a distorted system, ritual without knowledge, religion without awakening. The Gospel of Judas critiques institutional religion sharply. It challenges blind obedience. It questions sacrifice. It suggests that many who believe themselves faithful may be unaware of deeper truth. Jesus begins describing the structure of the cosmos. He speaks of the great invisible spirit, the self-generated one, divine realms of light, angelic beings, luminaries, and cosmic rulers who fashioned the material world. This is not simple storytelling. This is mythic cosmology. In Gnostic thought, the material world is not the ultimate reality. It is a shadow, a lower realm. The true home of the soul is light, and salvation is awakening to that origin. Judas listens. The others do not. Imagine Judas hearing this, knowing his destiny, understanding that he will be remembered as a traitor, yet knowing the truth runs deeper, chosen but isolated, enlightened but condemned. This gospel paints him as a tragic, almost heroic figure, and as the conversation deepens, Jesus begins revealing even more shocking mysteries about the creation of humanity, the rulers of this world, and the fate of souls. But Judas must decide. Can he carry the burden of what he now knows? Can he accept the role history will assign him? Or will he falter? Judas remains alone with Jesus. The others have been dismissed. The air feels heavier now, not with fear, but with revelation. Jesus begins to unveil what no one else has heard. Not Peter, not John, not James, only Judas. Jesus speaks softly. There exists a great invisible spirit, unbegotten, unnameable, beyond form, beyond comprehension, not a God among gods, not a ruler among rulers, but the source of all light, the eternal fullness, the boundless origin. In this cosmology, this spirit is not the creator of the flawed material world. Instead, from this infinite light emerge divine emanations, radiant beings called eons, each one reflecting a facet of divine fullness. From the great invisible spirit came the self-generated one, the divine luminaries, realms of incorruptible light. These realms exist beyond decay, beyond matter, beyond time, and Judas listens carefully, because this teaching changes everything. In the traditional canon, creation begins with "in the beginning, God created." But here, creation is layered, hierarchical, complex. The ultimate God is not the architect of suffering, not the source of corruption. The material world, Jesus explains, was shaped by lesser rulers, and this is where the tension deepens. From one of the divine emanations came a rupture, a being who acted without full knowledge, a flawed emanation. From that disruption emerged rulers, authorities, archons. These rulers fashioned the physical cosmos. They formed stars, they shaped bodies, they structured matter, but they did not possess the fullness of the great invisible spirit. They operated in ignorance. They believed themselves supreme. And this, Jesus implies, is the tragedy of the world. Not pure evil, but blindness. Blind rulers shaping a blind system, and humanity, caught inside it. Jesus describes how these rulers created Adam, but the breath within Adam did not come from them. It came from the higher realm, a spark of divine light trapped within flesh, a fragment of eternity enclosed in mortality. This is the Gnostic view of humanity. You are not merely body, not merely bone and blood. You are a spark of light, forgotten, asleep, bound to a system that does not know its origin. And Judas begins to understand his role. Judas asks, "What happens to those who are baptized in your name?" Jesus replies in a layered answer, "Not all souls ascend. Some remain bound to the cycle. Some return to the realm of the rulers. Only those who awaken, those who receive true knowledge, transcend." Salvation here is not ritual, not sacrifice, not institutional belonging. It is awakening, recognition, remembrance of one's divine origin. And Judas, hearing this, trembles, because he now sees the larger picture. He sees why Jesus laughs at empty rituals, why he rejects blind worship, why he separates himself from the others. The disciples believe loyalty is enough, but knowledge is required. Understanding is required. Awakening is required. And Judas, strangely, is the only one positioned to fulfill that awakening fully. But at immense cost, Jesus tells Judas something cryptic. "Your star has led you astray." But then he adds, "You will become the 13th. The number is significant. 12 disciples, 12 tribes, 12 structures of order. And Judas will stand outside that order, separate, isolated. He will not belong to the visible structure. He will exist beyond it. A necessary disruption, a break in symmetry. And again, Jesus reminds him, "You will be cursed. History will not understand. Generations will condemn. But he will exceed them all, because he alone understands the sacrifice required. Imagine carrying a role that ensures your name becomes synonymous with betrayal. Imagine knowing that your obedience will be misunderstood for centuries. The Gospel of Judas reframes the narrative as tragic obedience. Not treachery, but burden. Not greed, but cosmic necessity. Whether one agrees with this theology or not, it forces us to confront a question. How often are deeper truths misinterpreted by surface perception? Jesus returns to the statement, "You will sacrifice the man that clothes me." He explains that his true self is not the body. The flesh belongs to the rulers. The spark belongs to the higher realm. Death, then, is not defeat. It is release. Liberation from the garment. Freedom from confinement. In this gospel's framework, crucifixion is not tragic loss. It is cosmic escape. And Judas is the instrument. Without Judas, the body remains. Without Judas, the divine spark remains clothed. Without Judas, the plan stalls. The irony is overwhelming. The one remembered as traitor becomes facilitator. The one condemned becomes essential. The narrative shifts again, a vision of priests at an altar, offering sacrifices, invoking a name they do not fully understand. Jesus explains that many who claim authority operate without true knowledge. Religious systems perpetuate rituals, but knowledge liberates. The Gospel of Judas contains sharp critique of institutional religion. It suggests that some leaders serve lesser powers unknowingly, that piety can coexist with ignorance, that devotion without understanding can reinforce bondage. And Judas, again, stands apart, not aligned with the ritual system, but aligned with a hidden knowledge. The time approaches. The disciples still misunderstand. They argue. They question. They defend their vision. But Judas has seen something greater. He has heard what they have not, and he must now act. Not out of anger, not out of greed, but obedience to the secret instruction. And as the authorities approach, the text reaches its stark conclusion. The chief priests seek a way to arrest Jesus quietly. They approach Judas. He receives money. But in this telling, the payment is secondary. The act is intentional. He hands him over. And the gospel ends abruptly. No resurrection scene. No trial narrative. No detailed crucifixion account. Just a handing over. Silence. The act is done. Judas has handed Jesus over. No dramatic speech. No extended farewell. Just a transfer. A moment. A decision that echoes through history. And then silence. The Gospel of Judas ends abruptly. But our reflection does not. Because what lingers is not the act itself. It is the meaning behind it. In the canonical Gospels, like Matthew and John, Judas is depicted as the betrayer, motivated by money, influenced by Satan, overcome by regret. But here, in this alternative tradition, Judas is entrusted with hidden knowledge. He acts not from greed, but from grim obedience, and that reframing forces us into uncomfortable territory. Because if Judas believed he was serving a divine purpose, then history becomes far more complex. What if the role of villain is sometimes the role of a vessel? What if obedience sometimes looks like betrayal? The Gospel of Judas doesn't ask us to rewrite the New Testament, but it does ask us to question surface assumptions. It invites us to consider that divine plans may unfold in paradox, that tragedy and purpose can coexist, and that condemnation may not always tell the whole story. Imagine Judas after the arrest. The others scatter. Fear fills the air, but Judas carries something heavier than fear. He carries knowledge. He knows Jesus expected this. He knows this act was foreseen. He knows he was chosen. But knowledge doesn't erase pain. To be misunderstood by history, to have your name become synonymous with treachery, to be remembered as the symbol of betrayal, that is a burden few could bear. In this gospel, Judas becomes a tragic figure, not triumphant, not glorified, but isolated, the 13th, outside the 12, outside the foundation stones of institutional Christianity, alone with what he knows. Let's pause and step back. The Gospel of Judas emerges from a stream of early Christian thought, often called Gnosticism. This was a movement that emphasized hidden knowledge, divine sparks within humanity, a distinction between the highest God and lower cosmic rulers, and salvation through awakening rather than sacrifice. Other texts from this stream include the Gospel of Thomas and the Apocryphon of John. These writings don't center on atonement through suffering. They center on revelation, on remembering who you are, on escaping ignorance. And in that framework, Judas becomes the disciple who understands the mechanics of release. He facilitates the shedding of the flesh. He enables the return of the divine spark to its realm. But this theology is not the theology that shaped mainstream Christianity, and so history chose its narrative. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, Christian leaders were forming what would become orthodoxy. Texts that align with apostolic teaching were preserved. Others were rejected. The Gospel of Judas presented problems. It reinterpreted the crucifixion, it challenged church authority, it criticized ritual sacrifice, and it elevated a figure widely condemned. Writers like Irenaeus mentioned such texts critically, labeling them heretical. And so this gospel disappeared, buried, forgotten, until it was rediscovered centuries later, hidden in the desert, preserved in fragments, a voice from a forgotten theological battlefield. Now, let's imagine the inner conflict. If Judas believed he was fulfilling a divine instruction, would doubt still whisper? Would fear still rise? Would he question whether he misunderstood? The Gospel of Judas portrays him as enlightened, but enlightenment doesn't remove humanity. It intensifies responsibility. To know something others do not, to act on knowledge others reject, to carry a role that history will curse, that is not glory. That is sacrifice. And perhaps that is the deepest irony. In canonical tradition, Jesus is the sacrifice. In this alternative framing, Judas becomes a kind of secondary sacrifice of reputation, of legacy, of honor. Earlier, Jesus told Judas, "Your star has led you astray, yet also you will exceed them all." This tension is deliberate. Destiny is rarely simple. Purpose often comes wrapped in contradiction. The star may represent fate, a cosmic alignment, a role written into the architecture of the story. But even destiny does not remove sorrow. And as the gospel ends without resolution, no resurrection scene, no redemption arc for Judas, no reconciliation, we are left suspended with ambiguity. And perhaps that is intentional. What does this gospel ultimately ask of us? Not to replace one narrative with another, not to canonize Judas, but to wrestle with complexity, to confront how power shapes memory, to recognize that early Christianity was not monolithic. It was diverse, contested, filled with competing interpretations of who Jesus was and what his death meant. The Gospel of Judas reminds us that history is written by survivors. Orthodoxy is formed through selection, and some voices fall silent, not because they lacked conviction, but because they lost the theological struggle. Yet even so, their whispers remain. Picture a long table. 12 seats are filled. One seat stands slightly apart, not fully removed, but not fully included. That is Judas in this gospel. Necessary but separate. Chosen but condemned. And the question lingers, how often do we misunderstand those who stand outside the circle? How often do we rush to judgment without hearing the full story? How often do we reduce complexity just to comfort ourselves? The Gospel of Judas doesn't give easy answers. It gives tension, and tension forces thought. In the end, Judas hands Jesus over, and the story stops. But the echo continues. Whether you see this gospel as heretical speculation or as a window into early Christian diversity, it challenges certainty. It stretches imagination. It confronts assumption. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that faith has always existed in conversation, in disagreement, in search. The name Judas may forever carry betrayal, but in this forgotten manuscript he carries knowledge, and with that knowledge a burden few would choose. Thank you for watching.